Welcome all to the panel Roma Civil Society Organizations in Europe, Navigating Uncertainty in Times of Brexit and COVID-19. This is an event part of the summer series of the Wales Institute of Social and Economic Research and Data, WISERT. And the session will be recorded and will be available on the WISERT website. I think Chloe is going to be sharing a link in the chat for you to see. My name is Dana Brablek, and I am a postdoctoral researcher and member of the WISERT project, Borders, Boundary Mechanisms, and Migration. And in this event, we will discuss how civil society organizations working in the area of Roma integration have been impacted by Brexit and COVID-19. And today we have a brilliant group of 4 panel speakers. So please let me introduce, first of all, Petr Torak, MBE, who was born in the Czech Republic and is Roma. In 1999, after several racially motivated attacks, he moved into the UK. In 2008, Torak became a police officer and dedicated the majority of his time to promoting community cohesion and the investigation and prosecution of perpetrators of modern slavery. Today, Petr Torak is the Chief Executive Officer of Compass Charity, which he co-established in 2010. In 2021, Torak became an honorary consul of the Czech Republic in Peterborough, providing consular services to Czech citizens. Today, we also have with us Daniel Balash. And Daniel Balash is the company director and head of service at Connecting Roma, a community interest company that supports, represents, and advocates for the EU Roma community and offers support for professionals working with the EU Roma people. Daniel Balash came to the UK in 2000 from the Czech Republic as well, and has lived in Bradford since arriving in the UK. And he started his career as an apprentice for the NHS as a business administrator and has worked for the public and financial sectors. In 2011, Daniel became an EU Roma interpreter working with the Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council on projects focusing on over 300 Roma families. Today, we also have Marius Taba, who is a Romanian Roma who works for NHS Doncaster. He holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Bucharest and has held research and visiting lectureship positions in Romania and Hungary. And since January this year, 2021, he is a member of the Board of Trustees of Friends, Families and Travelers, a leading NGO working for Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities from the UK. And Marius Taba worked as a grants and monitoring manager at the Roma Education Fund, has taught at several universities and published in academic journals. And Marius Taba has a long track record in policy development at local and international levels, in education reforms for Roma from Central and Eastern Europe in more than 15 countries. And finally, we also have with us Dr. Laura Cashman, who is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at Canterbury Christ Church University. Here, her PhD from the University of Glasgow examined the implementation of Roma integration policies in the Czech Republic. And her research continues to focus on racist discrimination against Romani communities across the EU. She has published articles and book chapters examining specific challenges in education and employment policies in local contexts, focusing on the segregation of Romani children in so-called special schools. And Laura Cashman also has experience as a consultant for EU reports. And here, oh, sorry. I was saying that Laura Cashman also has experience as a consultant for EU reports, and her expertise has also been called upon as an independent expert in court cases related to asylum claims. And the chair for today's event is going to be Martina Feilse, who is a professor in criminology and criminal justice at Bangor University. Martina is a co-director of the WISERT Civil Society Center, also a member of the WISERT research project, Borders, Boundary Mechanisms and Migration, as well as a co-director at the Welsh Centre for Crime and Social Justice. And just to add a brief note, the panel will be a roundtable style event in which all our 4 panel speakers will be discussing several themes introduced by Martina. And we will have time after the panel discussion for questions from you all. And you can either ask questions directly to panel speakers or use the chat if you prefer. Thank you. Martina.
Thank you very much for the introductions, Dana. Can I start by thanking all panel members for their time today? It's really greatly appreciated. And we're really, really excited to be hearing your views on some of the themes that we've put together. These themes are born out from some of the early fieldwork that we are doing around the Borders, Boundary Mechanisms and Migration project, which is looking at this civil society support offerings for migrants across a number of European countries. In that discussion, the support available to Roma communities across Europe has become quite an interesting theme across the Czech Republic, across the UK and Greece, as we are looking at it at the moment. And one of the themes that's been coming up quite frequently in those discussions is that notion of integration, and whether it is a purely positive notion of integration or something else. So I wanted to start our discussion with just exploring your views and experiences of that theme of integration, what it is, what it looks like when it works, whether some of the current practices that we see in integrating Roma into the community, their new communities or in their established communities, are working, and what the challenges are that actually lead to certain amounts of social exclusion. So if I can turn to Petr first to give us his views and opinion on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. So for me, the notion of integration is an interesting concept, something that I have been able to kind of practice and also observe in my own case and in my family. Coming into the UK over 20 years ago from a country where integration is quite often perceived more like an assimilation, something that Maria Theresia and her son Joseph II has always been trying to do, and the system from communists and until recent days been trying to do with Roma people, to assimilate them, to take away their gypsiness, from them, then coming to the UK and coming into the country where actually you are allowed and able to integrate on your own merits, on kind of your own terms. So you kind of are given the opportunity to feel part of the society and the city where you live at, but also retaining your own cultural knowledge, your language ability, and all those kind of things. And that's the beauty of integration, and I think the true integration that I personally see as a successful. Obviously, there are still different stages of integration, and when I compare it to, for example, the Asian Pakistani community in Peterborough, where I live, the integration went through different stages, and I think it will be very similar to what Roma are going through, or what they will have to go through in the next few generations. So I see that suddenly there is now the generation of children kind of thinking, I don't need to learn or I don't need to retain the language, let's say Czech language or Roma language. So there's a generation of children that are kind of losing their cultural heritage. But I think as we go on, and I see it from the Asian Pakistani community, it will become again important, and it will kind of become, there'll be a recognition of the cultural richness and the language richness. So, but so far I'm very positive about the way Roma are integrated into the UK. And I always say when I speak to somebody that it's probably the first time in history, from the 12th century until today, this is the first time in history where Roma people have been given a chance to integrate on their own merits. What are the challenges to prevent, social exclusion? I would say that there are still obviously challenges. One of the challenges is the Brexit, but we will talk about this later, but also the development of what is happening in other countries, because obviously Roma people had to go through lots of atrocities and lots of prejudices, discrimination, marginalization, and also extermination. So the trust to public authorities and other kind of stakeholders is very low. And every time something happens in Europe, I always see it obviously when talking to the community here in Peterborough and other parts of the UK, it has got a knock-on effect on the Roma community here. So you might have heard about a case in Czech Republic, in Teplice recently, where a Roma man had died during a police interrogation. And it was obviously still under investigation, but still this has got already an effect on the Roma community and their trust into public authorities. Even though obviously Roma have learned, and especially those that have been here in the UK for over, I don't know, 10 years or more, they've learned that the UK system, UK police and UK social services work completely different way, in different way than those in Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary and other European countries. But still, it has got an effect on the integration. I would say that the other challenge to prevent social exclusion is still obviously a language barrier to the older generation. I see that the generation that came here recently, or a generation that came here, like the generation of 40s and 50s and above of their age, they will struggle to learn English. I know that my parents, they've been here over 20 years now as well, and they'll probably never be able to speak English enough to say that they can speak fluently. They will not be able to have communication with their neighbor. They've got basic knowledge of the language, but not fluent to have a conversation. So this is obviously a barrier for many of those people to interact and integrate into the society whilst retaining their cultural background.
Thank you, Petra. It's very helpful. And I think that the temporal element is a really interesting one, how long it takes and the different phases of integration. Fascinating. Daniel, can I turn to you?
Yes, certainly. Hi, everybody, and welcome. Just to add on to what Peter's saying, I'm really, really happy how Peter has captured it there, and we feel exactly the same. And actually, integration is a principle of how we set up Connecting Roma, and definitely Connecting Roma lies, and it's on that principle, and certainly is the main goal is integration. I think with integrating, and we've seen this evidently, and I've been absolutely overwhelmed by the response of national and local organisations, services and agencies that show that they do care about Roma people and that they are aware. I think where the barrier aspect is lying is with the Roma community themselves, and it's the understanding of the UK system and their rights and different procedures and processes that organisations and services have. I think, as Peter said, we definitely are on a good path, and the Roma, even adults, are learning about the system. However, there is that language barrier, and there are some challenges, and I think even with this language barrier, it's just very complex for organisations to almost understand, say, the client or patient that they have. As you know, they come from Slovakia, Hungary, Czech, yet they're Roma, so they might get a Czech interpreter and or a Slovakian interpreter, and actually the family speaks more Roma and so on. And I think what the issue actually is data. And even though that the national and local organisations again are responding and are on board of engaging the Roma community, is quite difficult to take it high up and actually look at the governments around that. And it's to do with data and actually capturing the ethnicity and so on. Census has just done absolutely brilliant, so we're hoping that when that data comes, we'll all be able to utilise it. But we have already been speaking to the police and NHS to look at recording data and that little bit better, and actually capturing which clients and patients are coming through. And I think then as organisations and as charity and other services can use that and actually see, yes, we have an issue in NHS and we need to do so on, or we have an issue with GP practices and police. So I think there is work definitely to be done, but it's going to be valued. And as Peter said again, I'm so happy how he captured it. Looking at the history, there's not been a time where we had Roma people in this position. We've actually have Roma people now feeling like this is my new home. it's no longer back home, but this is potentially my new home. This is where my children are going to live. And it's almost that they're looking from the bottom to the top, thinking, how do I get there? And as an organization, we're really, really happy to see that. And we hope to capture this moment and kind of utilize, take advantage of this. And with the help of the UK system, as we believe is already in place, we'll be able to certainly integrate. Again, as Peter said, I've certainly seen that in my life, coming to the UK. I came in 2000. We've certainly seen some racism and discrimination when I came, but it was pretty much to do with confusion. We were called Kosovans, and we took that step to integrate ourselves. There was a community centre that we took part in, with the wider community, and we eventually got on. We understood each other's culture. We slept in each other's houses. We shared music, food, and so on. And that actually built me to be able to live in Bradford and be here today. So integration is very, very important, and we hope to get there soon rather than later in the UK.
Thank you, Daniel. The strong emphasis there on the local element of integration and actually engaging with that community locally rather than possibly sometimes reflecting on policy and the wider environment. So thank you very much for that. Marius, can I turn to you?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dana, for putting this important event together. I'm very happy to be invited here and to share some of my thoughts. So don't be scared if I will be rhetoric, and I will try to theorize some of the concepts. So to me, integration of Roma, first of all, it's a social construct. It's that come with the modernity, but also it's embedded into the historical experiences of Roma into Europe. And here I am thinking of slavery. I am thinking of what was the era of eugenism and how romanticizes racialization, but also portraitizing Roma as being different, but not the otherness of Edward Said, but something more specific to European level. So for instance, Roma are labeled as being lazy, but it's forgotten historically that they have contributed 500 years into the Romanian society when they were slaves. So majority of the churches, majority of architectural edifice, they mention the architecture, they mention the creator of that, but nobody said who did those bricks. There is no recognition of what was transition from the feudalism to capitalism and what was the contribution of Roma work as being slaves in the Romanian territories. Later on, we do have in the beginning of the 20th century the so-called eugenists that they came with the idea, and here I am raising the question because we are among intellectuals. The intellectuals portraitized Roma as being uneducatable, as being thieves, as being criminals. And they put the science from psychology, from statistics, sociology, criminology, etc., to bring evidences that Roma are different. However, the eugenism was in two parts. So it was the one that went towards extermination and ended up with the Holocaust, and it was the so-called part of eugenism, or the so-called attitude towards Roma from the perspective of utilitarianism, saying if we educate these people, if we integrate them, they will be beneficial for the nations where they are living. So we have on the one hand Eva Justin demonstrating that Roma children are not educable, and they have to go to special schools, and they have to be treated by the state institution in a specific way. And then we had the moderate part of Eugenie saying, if they will receive basic training, if they will receive basic education, they will be absorbed by the economy and they will do the so-called undeserved job. So this story, it's pushing us to raise the question, actually two questions. One, the inequality by design, where the institutions were set up to put Roma in different settings with the aim of integration or with the aim of extermination, of taking the Roma body from the healthy, wealthy, very determined population to build a nation, and the other one that was a marginal, a liminal role given to Roma, that they have to live near us, but they have to take just the some of the jobs. And this is bringing us to what is special school, as an example, what is inequality by design. So special schools, by default, they label the Roma children as being with light or severe mental retard, and they prepare them for being later on street cleaners, being carpenters, or all other professions that are undesirable, they are undeserved by the job market. So this is one example of how integration is coming as a result of a institutional malfunction or malpractices. The second one is how the ghettos were created, and what we are having today, mahalas or colonies. It is coming from the concept that Roma were romanticized, the nomadist part of Roma, how to settle them, how to make them like us. And this ended up in some housing policies that were designed. So now there are some anthropologists, sociologists, and other researchers around saying that, oh, Roma cohesion, make them sitting together. Some others are using an ugly concept to me, which they say natural segregation. They want to sit together. They feel better among them. But those are results of policies, state policies that push them, again, at the marginal level of society. They were tolerated. If you look in the villages of Slovakia, I had a chance to travel around. If you look at the villages of Slovakia, if you look at the villages of Bulgaria, if you look, they all the time, even by the concept of Louis Vacan, the stigmatization of the community, of the neighborhood, it's one. But the question is how they ended up there. Who put them there? So the concept of integration, it comes as a result of a bad policies. And if you analyze this from the perspective of history, we'll understand that if the institutions, if the state will design colorblind policies, American level, or non-discriminatory policies, European level, so the notion of integration wouldn't be necessary to be debated today. The last point that I wanted to say, it is that integration, it's a political instrument developed by the people that deracialized Europe. And integration came onto the public agenda through the French lobby in the European Union and Council of Europe and other international institutions, just because they didn't want to see in the French Constitution, you don't have different ethnicity and race recognized by the state. So And they created a general concept, social integration, economic integration, etc., just not to recognize the differences and somehow the gap that it is between different races, ethnicities, etc., and the majority of population. So they created a general umbrella which was called integration or social integration of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariusz. Yes, absolutely. Looking at the kind of the historical context of how integration has become a driving concept is really important. And the example of France is always a curious one, where racism cannot exist because you do not record people's ethnicity, which is obviously not actually a true reflection of what's happening in France either. Thank you very much for that. Very interesting contrast between the kind of quite a personal reflection on integration as something that happens in communities to that kind of macro level, policy level pressure that comes with the notion that you have to integrate, to conform really, I guess, with majoritarian ways of living maybe. Laura.
Thank you. And thank you as well for the invitation to come. Already, it's so interesting listening to everybody. I would say, I think integration kind of, as has already been indicated, it's supposed to replace the older idea of assimilation. But my feeling is that after 20 years of talking about social integration, by now governments, following what Marius has said, they mean assimilation. That's still what I think governments are looking for. And whereas what I would argue is that for integration to be successful, yes, it's important for Roma people to learn the language and to gain trust in the institutions if they're trustworthy. But I don't think enough emphasis has been placed yet on the majority communities also adapting and changing to make space and to make room to allow for a two-way interactions. And the examples that I've seen in my research where things work best are examples where, schools employ Roma teachers so that both Roma and non-Roma children see Roma in positions of authority and positions where they are the educator. Where you see people working together in those kinds of situations. It's a while ago now since I did my research in the Czech Republic, but there was one interview that always stood out to me, and it was a teacher who's a Czech non-Roma teacher, and she said, we were really nervous when they said they were going to bring Roma teaching assistants into the staff room. We didn't think we could trust them. But now, having worked together for a few years, we recognize, that was a mistake. That was our prejudice. And I think that's what's at the heart of all of this. The integration is only successful when we challenge the racism and the anti-Gypsyism that Roma face. And Marius has outlined that, the slavery, the sterilization of women, Stanislav Tomasz just this week. There are so many examples of where state authorities and institutions have failed Roma people that they need to work harder to win their trust. And I think it does work better at community levels where you can interact with people one-to-one, get to know them, become their friends. As Daniel said, listen to the music, really get to the heart of that relationship. But the bigger difficulty I can see nationally and internationally is that failure of states to recognize that something has to be done by the majority communities too. And sadly, anti-Gypsyism attracts votes among populists, and they see that as the Conservative government in the UK, all the other governments around the world who bring in these new laws or policies or just threaten things in order to win votes at election time. It's really disappointing. But so on integration, I would say it has to be about inclusion, and it has to be about both sides. But where I see it failing at the moment is the failure to address the structural racism in societies, and to assume that it's only for the Roma to integrate themselves instead of for both parties to make changes.
Thank you, Laura. Can I pick up on that point and actually put something to you around the recent policy changes and the legislation actually coming through in the policing bill, which is putting some pressure on nomad lifestyles across the UK. And there was also quite a high profile commentary in a local newspaper, in a national newspaper, which talked about there's no more time and space for different ways of living in the UK. That's the kind of themes you are referring to, I'm assuming.
Yes, it is. And that particular article, I'd sort of forgotten. I think I'd blanked it out again. But you're right. The fact that the Times would publish an opinion piece that was, really promoting sort of ethnic cleansing and saying we're just not going to allow for this anymore. But yeah, the new crime and policing bill will make it incredibly difficult for travellers to maintain their lifestyles, simply because the law will change to say it's illegal to ever stop any place, not permitted land. But local councils have erased and removed all the spaces that used to be available for travellers to stop at. So there's almost no place legal left to stop. So again, that's the government, not making councils provide that land and then suddenly criminalising travellers for maintaining their behaviours. But I suppose it hadn't come up so far because that's something that, and that's an interesting issue I've heard people say in the UK was they expected the Roma who migrated to Britain from Europe to be travellers and to be nomadic, and of course most weren't. And they'd long settled, and they were migrants. They were just like me. I moved from Ireland to work here, and they've moved from the Czech Republic to work here, and But there was this idea that this nomad culture. So I think the stereotypes that we all British people have about gypsies and that carefree lifestyle so easily turns into a parasitic lifestyle, and twisted by populists. But yeah, so I the current government legislation is very problematic in the UK, but across Europe, you hear law and order is a great way to win votes for right-wing parties, and an easy way to, without even saying it, in so many words, it's going to attract votes of people who just are nervous or anxious about Roma people, and saying, oh, we'll bring law and order back to our community. That's how mayors get elected across Europe. Yeah.
Thanks, Laura. And as you say, and I think that's what Marius's point was as well, around the long history of those kind of tropes around prejudices existing against in a number of different communities as well. So in terms of COVID and Brexit, it has been highlighted that it has shown the pressures that the Roma community is under. How do you see Brexit in particular, I guess, hoping to look towards the end of the pandemic, but Brexit in particular to affect the community? Let's try and reverse or kind of mix things up a little bit. Shall we start with Marius this time around?
Thank you, Martina. To me, Brexit and Roma in general, it remains a political issue. And from here, I will try to build my my argument. So the political issue against Roma, it's intermingled sometime by politicians, but there is an epistemic violence. And my question would be, yes, politicians, they are looking for votes. They are looking at what Kasmude define as populism and what is the entire wave in Europe. And to me, it is that Roma issue moved from what was the right-wing parties, what was Le Pen, what was Ataka in Bulgaria, what was Jobbik in Hungary, what was EFD in Germany. So they moved from the political agenda of those extremist parties that they had racist agenda into a mainstream policies. And here, I would argue that in majority of the countries, you would see direct coalition in the government with the so-called extreme parties, or as it is case in Romania, some of the politicians migrated into the mainstream parties, and in order to get more voters and supporters, the mainstream political parties put it in their agenda, Roma or racial or ethnical issues. And here I will give you a couple of examples. Hungary, Jobbik, 10 years ago, it took almost, it was 17% of the parliament in the seats in the parliament. So it was quite progressive with two issues. First, it was after the first crisis, economic crisis, 2007, 2008, they came up with the idea anti-Roma, and it was all the marching, all the paramilitary things around. The second wave, they touch upon the Jewish. It was the politicians from the Jobbik that they were doing blood tests to have to justify if they have traces of Gypsy or Jewish in their blood. So it was like that. Then it came that they started to siege some institutional and democratic institution, ending up with what they turn and threw out the CU, the academic. So if we look at post-crisis, post-economic crisis, models in Hungary, all the time they started with Roma. Today crisis, securitization, criminalization of Roma, and portraitizing their risk behavior, the Roma as disease spreaders, the Roma as being disobedient with the rules. It's also, in a way or another, coming like that. It's even kind of a recurrent approach what was during the Second World War. So Roma were portrayed as a disease spreader for typhoid houses, typhoid fever, it's called, yeah? So it's the thing that it's recurrent to me, and I think this is important for the academic debate. It is that Roma sometimes is just the tip of the iceberg. And post-crisis, the only thing, it appears Roma, but if you look a little bit careful, you will see that even here. So it was in a Brexit agenda, the so-called, to me, I would say this word. So to me, it's kind of a welfare chauvinism, saying that Roma and the Easterners will come and will take our benefits and work just for British and etc., etc. But don't forget that in the Labour Party, which by the way, I could sympathize, it was some anti-Semitic scandals. It was there some things that were at the level of political declaration. But if we look deeper and deeper, you will see that Roma and backwardness of the Eastern European people, sometimes I end up with the second level, with the third level of populist and radical discourse that it's adopted by the mainstream party. So racism and anti-Roma or anti-Gypsies, as Laura mentioned, it's not anymore ammunition of the extreme right parties, but little by little, actually, it's flooding the mainstream parties. And this is the danger that it's our days in the region and here in the UK as well.
Thank you, Marius. So using Brexit as a tool to use, spread propaganda, I guess, against the community and a number of communities. Yeah, thank you. In terms of impact on civil society organizations themselves, Daniel, do you feel that there is direct impact of Brexit on the work you're doing? Is there concerns amongst community members around Brexit?
Yeah, I think there has been from get-go, and as Marius mentioned, definitely for the Roma community still feels like it's a political agenda. I think when it did come around, a lot of the families actually left the UK. They felt like the UK doesn't want them, and it again became to the fact that there was a lot of confusion, and we did have to go around and spread information, share information, so people get to understand what actually this means for them, and the fact that the EU settlement came out, and not to say that this scheme was anyway perfect, or the fact that it was timed wasn't nice, and actually brought up so many challenges for the Roma community. However, it does mean that the UK have given them a settled status. It does mean that they have their residency guaranteed in the UK and almost becoming a citizen. Hence why I mentioned before, where we have this feeling now of this is my new home, and we see that as a positive. However, again, it certainly still has that feeling attached to it, where people are unsure of how the Roma people are unsure how the wider community is going to respond. You know, they're still, due to the history, sorry, I think the internet's quite bad. Due to the history, I think that they're anticipating the worst from the wider community. So again, I would say there's still a lot of work to do post-Brexit, 100%. I think there's more work to do than we had during the EU settlement scheme themselves. I think it's been really, really difficult for us as Home Office only come out with very limited information throughout. And I still see that kind of being in place. I mean, we've got post-Brexit, and when we're looking into, you know, what happens now, can people kind of come to any of the visa and so on. There's, again, very limited information. It just says, like, you know, you can come and have a short stay, you can come for a holiday. So I think we've seen that throughout. And again, Home Office come out to fund certain organisations at the beginning and then left it there. And these were, like, for example, in the Bradford area, they had about 6 organisations dealing with the EU settlement. And at this stage, it's July, it's post-Brexit, we still have a couple of thousand without their status. So I guess we're still nervous about what we're going to be doing with these people and how we're going to support them, again, because of the limited information. So we hope to see in these couple of weeks that we'll have some more resources and tools coming to us where we can deal with post-Brexit.
Thank you very much. There is I think, you know, there's a sense that there's another Windrush scandal waiting to happen, really, in relation to the EU settlement scheme. And also, of course, that Brexit has allowed kind of more xenophobic attitudes and racist attitudes to be expressed more widely than they maybe have been before. So there's that kind of sense that something might be brewing. Petra, is that something you would kind of share from your perspective? Sense of unease around this?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, for all European citizens, this had been a big shock, you know, to learn that suddenly UK is leaving the European Union. But for Roma people, I think that was a kind of double shock and also a big threat, because for many migrant workers, obviously, this was a threat to their economical situation. For many of us that came here to seek place of safety, this was obviously a big threat to our security and the way of we are living, and also the way we are bringing our children up, and everything that we believe is right. So suddenly Roma people had to start thinking, what will happen if we have to go back where we are going to go, because we left our homes behind. We have nowhere to go to. We are used to certain living standard in terms of how people can treat us and how they can behave to us, and what we can do if somebody misbehaves towards us. All this would be gone and lost within a second if we would have to go back. So for many, obviously, this had caused a big anxieties and stress. And obviously, subsequently, this had placed loads of us from community organizations under huge pressure from the community, because obviously everyone was very keen to have their settled status, but not everyone was capable to do it themselves because of their language ability, because of their understanding of IT systems, because of all the documents they've had or not had, maybe because of people moving from one city to other to look for a job, or maybe because of people being often victims of trafficking from Roma settlements and other things. So all this had impacted on the number, and for our charity, obviously, it had a huge impact. We've our advice center that we run had seen a huge increase, and especially towards the end of the deadline that recently came up on the 30th of June. We had a huge influx of people coming in and applying for the EU settlement scheme, especially for their children, because many people haven't realized that whilst an adult has got a status, the child has to have it as well. So from having 5-10 people coming through the door in a day, we suddenly had over 40 or 50 people coming in a day. We actually featured on BBC News last week, where we've had actually a queue of people from our venue to the other side of the road, and people were still hoping to get their status. And there are still people that haven't got their EU status in place, and they'll be obviously hoping to get their late applications in. So it is putting people under pressure, but obviously the institutions and organizations as well. And obviously the same goes for the Czech for the embassies in the UK, where obviously they have recorded a huge influx of people suddenly applying for passports and so on. So, but I think to put a hand on heart, I think we've done everything that was in our hands to help the community to settle here, because we recognize how important this was. Our organization had prioritized the EU settlement scheme as a priority number one, and we stopped or postponed most of the activities to focus on helping people to stay here in the UK. From my understanding,
this meeting is being recorded.
From my understanding, most of the people that are in the UK, that they actually want to stay in the UK. Very small number of people actually want or return back into their countries, but the majority stay here. And actually, the other side of the coin, I'm still getting. Only yesterday, I had a free request from people from Czech Republic asking how they can move into the UK and stay here legally. There's still lots of people that want to move over here, especially after what has happened in the Czech Republic with the recent case. So yeah, this will obviously put other people under enormous pressure and stress as well, because they want to be joined by their families that haven't been here in the UK. So yeah, it is stressful, but hopefully majority of the people will now be secure and they will be allowed to stay here in the UK indefinitely.
Thank you very much. Do you have a sense then that there is a recognition? I mean, you've worked as a police officer in the past. There will be questions once the deadlines expire and the Home Office makes a decision on what should happen with those who haven't achieved settled status. Do you have a sense that there is engagement with your organisations to look after those who haven't managed to fulfil the process yet?
Yeah, speaking to Home Office, they've assured us, working for the organizations, that there will be exceptions and indefinite exceptions for children that haven't got status. They will not be penalized by the system, and they can have status at any point. So the victims of domestic abuse, victims of trafficking, and many other cases. I think majority of the people that have lived in the UK until end of last year will be able to apply under some circumstances. But at the same time, whether the Home Office and the government has done enough to support organizations, and especially the grassroots organizations, in helping people with EU settlement scheme, I would say no, definitely not. There are organizations that have been funded, but I think those organizations are living and breathing by the community, and they know the community, they have got culture and language knowledge. I don't think that they have been supported sufficiently to help as many people as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, Laura and I are both in a position that as EU citizens, we had to go through the same process, but I guess there is a different context here in terms of, you were all talking about going back home as something that is not necessarily an easy option or a desirable option because of the discrimination experience back home. Do you think that puts a different element? I mean, Brexit has been painful, I think, for most European Union citizens who live in the UK, but that puts a different angle on this. And this is just an open, anybody who wants to comment on that question. It just occurred to me that, whilst we're all feeling this pain, it's felt quite differently if you feel that going back to your origin country is not actually an option.
Yeah, definitely. If I may come in on this, I think, again, I've mentioned this throughout the discussion, that Roma people are in a position of now realizing, and some of them have been here over 10 years and actually just starting to realize that the UK is becoming their home. And they're just now opening their eyes, where they're realizing that my children are actually established in the UK as the youth and so on. And I think it's definitely to do with all of these aspects. And the pandemic has definitely shown that, again, the local organisations care and that they're there for them. But I definitely have to was what Peter said there. Being a local organisation or a micro company, the structure that the government has put in, you always get the micro information or the micro funding, or are in touch, at a certain level than where you need to. And again, as I mentioned, we don't actually have the actual data where it says, there's 3,000 Roma with X, Y, Z issues. Is really hard for them higher levels to look at what's needed. We have just recently, again, the pandemic has shown that the government is looking into this a little bit more, as they have actually used a lot of these organisations to help during the pandemic. So we're hoping that this concept, it will carry on and can be used by ourselves, as voluntary sectors, charities, and companies like us, where we can again hopefully help. But yeah, I agree. There's organisations around that kind of have the knowledge, can support. As they supported through the Brexit and through the EU settlement, certainly we can carry that on. But it needs to be on a national level, and the higher levels really need to look into that. We need the government to put in a structure so this can work. I've heard also, just to finish up on this, during the discussion, especially what Marius said there, what's going on in the European countries and the history. And, I have many people come to me and use the example of the Asian community, as Peter did. And I certainly take that as an example back to back to the Roma people. A lot of professionals come to me and say, it's okay, in 20, 30 years, it'll be fine. We've seen that with the African, we've seen that with the Asian. It'll be okay. You'll soon be doctors. You'll soon be lawyers. And it's like, guys, we've been in the Europe for 900 years, 1,000 years, and we've got like one radio channel, and we like 5 minutes on TV, and we have ghettos and camps set up. There's nothing that repeating itself in the UK. We can certainly see that one of the fields will potentially become a Roma ghetto, where the Roma people are just building, especially now post-Brexit. And I think this is why people are really scared. Do I go back home and go back into the ghettos, or do I stay here and hope that I will not build this ghetto again? Maybe we can get out, and as these organizations and other people are getting on with their life, potentially we might be able to join in. And, fingers crossed we can, if the government will work with us.
Great, thank you. I think that, we have another theme coming up about what we can learn from the way some of the support mechanisms are set up in the UK, but maybe one of the actual drivers here seems to be, to me, some of the civil society organizations that we see emerging, which seem to be much more proactive possibly than they can be back home. So I wondered whether we can start from that point and then take it through to that next theme, what lessons can be learned, so that we avoid the errors of the past. Can I also remind everyone to put some questions in the chat if you want? This is the last thing. We go around once more, and then we can open up to a broader discussion. Laura, can I start with you this time round? What do you think the role of civil society organisations is in terms of making sure that some of these historic lessons are not being repeated in the UK as we move forward?
I think it's tricky, because in some respects, I think the UK is kind of different. One of the reasons we've ended up with Brexit, I suppose, is this sense of exceptionalism that the UK is different to Europe. But my feeling is that here, talking to people who work for local authorities in particular, is that the British state likes to outsource things to companies or charities or any kind of third sector, keep the state as small as possible. And that might work sometimes, but I think the problem is, as Petter and Daniel have said, is that it's too micro often. You lose that joined up connectedness, and something can work someplace and not work someplace else. So something, I suppose, that whereas I think the European networks find a home in Brussels, they get they get EU sponsorship. You know, there's some really quite well-developed EU-wide civil society, Roma civil society networks now that function very well. And I think we saw that with the case last week with Stanislav Tomasz's death, and how quickly an open letter could be produced. And, you know, European-wide Roma organisations could connect with one another and get things done. So for all the talk about Brussels bureaucracy, I think sometimes perhaps now, I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear from the panel, but losing access to that kind of funding, will that make a difference? Or, you know, will that cause problems in the future for that sense of connectedness across Europe? Because usually these are Europe-wide issues that can benefit from that sharing of knowledge and expertise. But that's a question, not an answer. Sorry.
Thanks, Laura. Anyone would like to have a go at? I think there's an important point here. So because when we were looking at civil society organizations, European funding for a lot of them is a key driver, and obviously comes with particular expectations of connections and anti-discriminatory practices, or the expectations that are set within that. So yeah, Marius, Daniel, I think we've lost Petra for the moment. Who wants to?
I just say a quick one, to be honest, and just a second. To be honest, I hope that the UK have thought about this, and what I'm hoping, and this is just a dream, guys. It's literally a dream, and I'm hoping to achieve it. Is that in the future and very near future, we can hopefully help and support the Roma community in Europe, and hopefully as Roma people we can shine. I class myself, I wasn't born in the UK, but I class myself as a British Roma. I love Yorkshire. I class myself as a Yorkshire man. And yeah, you know, I hope that Roma people can shine and actually be the example for Europe. But fingers crossed.
Thanks, Daniel. Marius?
To me, I think the role of civil society, I served it for the last 25 years. And then I afford to challenge it as well. So the political action, to me, it needs a political answer. Because the civil society, indeed, in Europe overall, somehow weaken. And weaken because the sources of finances are pretty much related and controlled by the state. So civil society, here in the UK, I'm quite new, just from my readings, and now I'm discovering some glitches there, but I'm talking generally in Europe. So with the structural funds that are managed by the government, so the civil society lost its function as a watchdog, as the whistleblower, and so on. So it became, in a way or another, what is here in the UK as well, kind of a second level of service providing, or replacing some of the institutional responsibility there in the community. So if this is the direction, we wouldn't reach the level of looking at the causes, and all the time civil society will be busy with repairing some of the institutional failures. So this is my general vision, and some of our colleagues might not say openly, because I know that they depend sometimes from the local or central government money, and then you cannot contend in this direction. But I wanted also to raise the point of knowledge production, and I touch upon in my first intervention about the epistemic violence. And here, I'm sorry, but I have to say it, is the role of academia. If some of the Roma policies fail, then the question it is, I'm repeating, who are the advisors of these politicians? Who provided the policy advice? Who provided the data and the information about the Roma community and the solutions. So this is one question. Second, it's with example now. So on the one hand, we have released a couple of months ago a study that says that UK is a race-free country and there is no racial action against different groups. And in parallel, we are running the act that you mentioned, Martina, against nomads of Roma, which ended up with seizing properties, big fines, including the imprisonment. So criminalization of ethnicity and criminalization of race remain as a state policy, but on the other hand, the university, the academia, it's accepting, and very few universities I follow on the public media and also on the social media reacted to a fake report by whom was commissioned, who undersigned that report. So if we are today quiet when it's about Roma, we might be, and you know that there is a right-wing people or conservatorist people in the university that claiming that the left-wing and they are victims of political correctness. Maybe one day would be like in Hungary when we have 200 public intellectuals in a list saying that these are the public enemy, these are the persona non grata in the UK universities. So the last point that I wanted to make, it is related exactly with the Roma civil society and their connection with the academia. It's portrayed, and there are some people here in some departments in the UK where they are clearly saying that we as Roma, we cannot be more than activists, and our knowledge production, our papers cannot reach the level of academic rigor, and we remain forever activists and members of the civil society. But the same people didn't react with a gross material error with the last report saying this is not an academic paper. The UK is not free of racism. Your methodology, your things, your intention of faking the science, because we are blamed as a Roma saying, oh, your methodology is okay, but you do have a purpose behind of some of your papers that you will put in them to serve your activism. But they don't react when it's a real breach of the science. So this is a thing that I will leave it open, and maybe next time we can discuss more about Roma into the academia and the way how some failures of the policies towards Roma are also result of quietness or non-involvement of some non-Roma and Roma academics in advising and in providing data for policy development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marius. I think, you know, there's two main points I want to pull from this. One is a challenge to academia, and I think that challenge is well made, that we need to really reconsider how we co-produce and work together with the communities we do research in. And I think one of the aspects of what we are hoping will follow from this panel in particular, and from the work we're doing in our work package, is actually do some of that work. I know Dana has been talking to colleagues in civil society organizations around how we can ensure that the engagement we're having is actually maintained, and will lead to possibly joint publications and those kind of things, because it is really key that we practice what we preach, I guess, is in many respects. The second point I want to take from this is that clearly the point around financial independence and questions around how civil society can actually have a political voice when it is funded by the state. And I think that is the point around the European funding, because it kind of neutralized that to some extent, although of course in some countries it's filtered through the local state government, so that doesn't quite work. But in other countries it was actually allowing that element of a a kind of a bit of a padding between the state directly. But yeah, absolutely key points. So before we kind of move to questions, I don't know, Dana, have we heard from, has Petter lost connection? I can't see him anymore.
No, he's not here, unfortunately.
Okay, he might have had an internet problem.
Yeah.
Can I turn to each of you for some concluding thoughts, something you want to add, anything we've missed that you feel a keen desire to share? Can I start with Daniel, if that's all right?
I think everything's been captured really, really well. Of kind of Roma being in the UK and looking at the future. Again, we're really, really happy to have this opportunity to have this discussion. I have to say that we have been overwhelmed by the response, especially during the pandemic, of how much care there is for the Roma community. And we hope that now the pandemic's over, we hope to share, as Roma people, we hope to share and be a part of festivals where we can share the music and the food. And I always say, I've almost come to realization myself with this, is that, I don't think the culture are fully integrated till you celebrate in that culture. And I think I really learned that from living in the UK. In Bradford, I think everybody comes down to Bradford to have a curry. I hope that Roma can share something like that as well, and have something like that in the future, and just be part of festivals and part of. So we've got the education and schools. We're hoping that a lot of Roma, especially from Czech and Slovak and Eastern Europe, do like a soup. They eat like a soup before they have their meal. So we're hoping that schools will hopefully serve a soup. Like a vegetable noodle soup one day, so we're working on that around West Yorkshire, and I think these little touches will hopefully help with the integration. Hopefully, this Brexit process and everything else that comes from that will be over with, and we can just kind of just look at our economy and strive and let Roma people be part of that as well.
Thank you, Danu. Laura?
I really like the idea of the soup for lunch. I think my kids would like that at school too. I think we've touched on a lot of things in and out. We've covered a lot of ground. I suppose for me, what I'm wondering is at the moment is that, as you said, the COVID, the crisis seems to be getting better. So we can soon see what the impact of, Brexit's been kind of muted because, well, we haven't been traveling anyway. So some of the questions around how easy or difficult will it be to move house or to go on a holiday or to get back into the country and to prove that we can be back here. Some of that will come up in the next year. But it's just been a really bizarre intersection of two horrible crises at once. So coming out of that, it would be good if positive things could come out of that now. And we can build on the community spirit that did develop. And just see where that all goes, really.
Thank you, Laura. Marius, do you want to add anything before we turn to the questions? I've got some coming through.
Yes, actually, I wanted to mention how Brexit and other populist ideas actually are embedded in the so-called illogic or illiberal roots. And here I am thinking of the concept of moral panic of Stanley Cohen, where media and other communication tools are put it there to create some populist waves around. But I just wanted to tell to the people that migration, historically looking at it, all the time, gave advantage, economic, social, and political, to the country that receive migrants, not the countries that send migrants. Looking at the level of remittances, that's a fake news. Look at the economic arguments and you will see that UK has more to gain from the migrants from the European Union. And this is just one click distance for the voters. the last point that I wanted to make, it is that the government, instead of looking at this, couple of days, they came out with a message of control and kind of a reinforcement saying that from the first day, they will come up to control, to double check, and to identify the ones that are staying illegal in the UK. So being human, it doesn't cost us too much. Being logical and being somehow guided by humanity and by science, in our days, it's just a couple of internet clicks. So I have also anecdotal information, because now I'm in a position to do a lot of field work, that children are delayed with their school enrollments. During the pandemics, there is also a slow interaction with their home countries' embassies. Some children are undocumented. Some adults that during the pandemic couldn't renew their IDs and their passport because the embassies were overcrowded. It seems that Brexit, it doesn't mean just Roma, but it means over 5 million European citizens to be affected. And the last point that I wanted to make, it's related with the contribution that Roma and young children can do it. Looking back at the concept of Cohen, of moral panic, indeed media and police, they look just at the most visible ones, the ones that are on street, the ones that are begging, the ones that are traffickers. But you have to look who built the Olympic sites. What is the contribution of the so-called undeserved jobs? Pandemic gave us the chance to see that office job, it is important, but there are some other jobs that are essential. So those people came here to do their life. Those people, they sold their houses back home, and they risked all their wealth to come to find here a new life. And the last point, during the pandemic, the Roma, or double endemic, they were here victims of closing businesses, of remaining the first jobless, of being put aside by the Western society. And back in Romania, they were portraitized by the Roma, by the Romanian media. For instance, Roma came back from the Western European countries and they infect us with COVID. Guess what? The most known Romanian community here in UK, Tsundere, it was the first that was under the siege of the army, the special forces of Romanian army. In the first weeks of pandemic, they closed and actually they put under the quarantine Tsundere. So securitization, criminalization of Roma, it remains our days, and in a times of crisis, it's just bouncing up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marius. Very important point to make. And clearly we also haven't seen fully the fallout yet from the effects of the pandemic and Brexit. Okay, we're getting a couple of comments and questions coming through in the chat. So there, Amy is making the point that there's different attitudes towards Roma, Gypsies and travellers in each of the 4 nations of the UK, and is asking the question whether, to what extent do our panel feel that there's an awareness that the UK government does not represent all UK attitudes towards Roma? Who would like to come in?
Yeah, I'll quickly, I'll take that one, and I think I'm hoping to actually answer 1 or 2 of these questions in this answer. I think I think they are aware, because we've certainly seen that during the pandemic, the Roma community has been mentioned. We've seen that Children's Social Care, which is one of our clients, have definitely spoken and is looking into the Roma communities, and that has gone higher. So I think they're aware, but again, I think they lack that data for many reasons. There's many Roma people that I don't like to actually put down that they're Roma, for several reasons. There's many that just put, that they're Czech or so on, and not sure that they should be putting that they're Roma. However, yeah, I think especially now, the fact that they've given the settled status, hopefully this data and census that's just been done will hopefully come about, and we'll be able to utilize it, and as police and NHS will do some of this work. Hopefully we will gain something from that. And as there's another question that's asked, and I mentioned Children's Social Care. I think because of all this and the fact that the government's not focusing directly on it, or hasn't been, and I'm saying hopefully they will, it is when we come out as Connecting Roma and put the organisation together. I understood that we're open to funding, and it's something that a organisation like myself do, but I just didn't see that putting the time and effort into that and potentially not getting it after 2 or 3 months. I understood there's an urgency, and the community needs us now. So I structured services. These are paid services. This is the interpreting service and advocacy service, where we can take on cases and work with many different aspects. And we've actually promoted this as a money-saving tool, as if you get an advocate from Connecting Roma, for example, attached as a social worker, you won't need to go down as a social worker with an interpreter to deal with an EUSS application that you don't know about. You could get our service, and we can basically do that, save money, because 2 people didn't have to come out, and so on. So a lot of work has gone into structuring these services, making sure that they're almost perfected, not that they're perfect, but they're perfected in some way so they can actually be utilized by professionals. And in my introduction, you certainly heard that we are there to represent and support the Roma community, but also we support the professionals working with the Roma people. And it's something that I am really proud of and happy to, of course, have, but it feels like I've been forced to do that, and we're being half utilized. As some councils can utilize us, some not. The councils that do utilize us, only half of the teams can, and other half not, because one manager's okay with it, but one manager's not. And I think it's all to do with this. Is the government actually have policies and structures in place, where it's allowing local authority to gain the numbers and the issues that they have, and then putting the funding to the right organizations to deal with the issues that stand, rather than just generalizing it at all points. Being aware that there's the Roma community, because again, when we put a bid in, or when we come part of a discussion, we get used straight away, all the organizations, like the fact that they've got a Roma organization there to be able to go to, but it's definitely not structuring the policies. And sorry, just to say, we have spoken to Roma people in Wales, and wow, guys, well done. I have to clap my hands. I've heard nothing but positivity, and they are happy, contained, and comfortable within your country. And it's so great to hear that is due to the government setting out these policies and structures. It's English. It's the neighbour, right, of England. They should again communicate and maybe mirror some of these policies.
Thanks, Daniel. And yes, I think you have answered a couple of questions around, the institutions of the Roma surviving, prospering, and the different mechanisms that you can take. And again, it also talks to Maris's point about an independence of the state, so that you don't have to depend. You can pick and choose the funding streams that you go for. Maris, Laura, do you want to come in on that first?
Well, can I just apologise for talking about the UK in Wales? Obviously, the Welsh government does do things differently, as does the Scottish. And having lived in Glasgow for a long time, it was quite apparent when I moved to England how different some of the discourses are and some of the approaches and the attitudes are. I think Scotland and Wales have done a better job of protecting and developing more inclusive structures for Roma and for travellers too, than has been the case in England. So yeah, apologies to all the Welsh people in the Welsh seminar. There's a question about books and things to recommend. I can't say them off the top of my head, but I don't know if later we could circulate a list or something, because there's some really excellent history books that are well worth reading to find out. I think the history of, my students certainly are always really surprised to find out about the history of travellers in the UK or Roma across Europe, and don't know about, say, the slavery or some of the things that have happened in Europe. So I'm sure we can share those afterwards. Yeah.
Great. Yes, I think we would definitely love to pick up on some of those themes and maybe put something together jointly after. That would be great.
Sorry, what I was going to say though was that just a few weeks ago, the headmaster of my children's school asked me to recommend some children's stories. And when I went looking, it was incredibly difficult to find storybooks for children that kind of positively represented Roma and traveller culture. There were picture books, and then there's adult stuff for adults, but there's very little in that sort of 8 to 12 range. And so I don't know if we drew a bit of a blank, really, to be totally honest. So if anyone in the panel has any good suggestions, my school's library would love to hear those. So I'll just ask that question here as well right now. I've just remembered it.
Great, thanks. Marius, Daniel, any good children's books?
Yeah, thank you. I might recommend a couple of authors. I don't recall by heart the titles, but for you specifically for Anglo-Saxon and Germanic space, it's Leo Lucassen, which look over the 600 years of history. So from 1,500 in our days. Leo Lucassen. Then would be an English author, a very good one, which is Angus Fraser, which actually wrote one of the first comprehensive book in a very, very thorough language and very well documented. Then you have Dennis Dilettant from America, another professor, very good in Central and Eastern European history of Roma. And we have quite very good progressive Roma historian and projects. One of them is Bogdan Chiriac. He's a historian graduating from Central European University, and he's specialized in Holocaust, and actually his thesis it's about the Ioan Antonescu trail in Romania, so the Nazi period of Romania, but also there are some very good work of him on Roma resistance and how, for instance, during the Holocaust and even during the slavery, Roma resisted in a way or another, from a cultural resistance till petitions and other type of resistance. Another author, it's again Romanian Roma, it's Petre Petcuț, who look at the slavery and the policies of post-slavery in Romania. We do have a non-Roma author in Romania who's called anyway, so there are a couple of authors that I listed here, but I wanted to take the example of Scotland, and this is an example that sometimes to do some good things for Roma, you need just a little political will. And introducing the Roma analytical category in a census, it might provide for policymakers the basics of the basic. And this example, it's not specific just to Scotland. It was in Hungary when putting Roma as a category in the census questionnaire actually boosted almost double the number of Roma. I mean, registration, because the Roma are there, by the way. The same in Serbia as well. So sometimes a very small, teeny political or intellectual gesture might end up in a very good result. And Scotland, indeed, it's a promising. They take at the end some humanistic part and started to strategize and project towards Roma. The other point that I wanted to make, it's related with the connection of institutions with Roma, because somebody asked here, say, I wonder how institutions of Roma are surviving and prospering in England, Wales, Scotland, etc., etc. So this is actually the politics of disenrootment. This is the politics of managing people around. This is when you portraitize people as being incapable. This is when you cut their dreams just serving your people. And here I'm coming a little bit with what our colleague Daniel said. I also done a lot of work in the field in the past, and I was meeting mayors in a locality where the school was segregated. Sometimes the Roma children were put it not in the main building of the school, but in annexes that in the past it was for burning wood and having there some other function, but not as a classroom. And some mayors, they had this option saying, oh, we don't have money. I try all my best to do for these children, but they are how they are not like you. So this was one of the exercise. The other example, they were playing, down, saying, well, I will do the things, well, I would help these children, but I don't have such a smart guy like you to help me to make this reality. And this is putting me in the position to say that actually this type of pointing the finger and creating the otherness, saying you, the Roma, should solve your problem. Actually, this is showing that there is no institutional setting and existence into the Roma community. And this is also pointed out in the work of segregation of Professor Robertson from America, saying that in the segregated, in a ghetto institution, this subpoenaing of the institution and their functioning, it makes to perpetuate the poverty and what does it means, all the mechanisms of ghetto and ghettoization. So in our case, I think that we can epitomize with what was the case of the murder by a policeman in the Czech Republic and the reaction. What was the civic society Roma reaction? This is also a sign of weakening. So we didn't have Black Lives Matter movement. It's already 2 weeks since the incident. Have you seen media? Have you seen civil society? Have you seen any alliances with the Roma civil society? So this is actually saying that through the historical oppression, through the historical putting aside and backwardness, actually it destroys the every intention to build community institutions. So if it is a lack into the Roma community, it is that through different means, the institutions disappear. And this is the case with the murder of a young guy in the Czech Republic by a policeman. So no reaction, so no institutions, and even no solidarity. So that's another thing. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it is a really interesting point, and Dana has written a little piece for the conversation on and the lack of response to that killing. And it's in stark contrast to the Black Lives Matter. Although, of course, George Floyd had however many black men that came before him before, the Black Lives Matter protests hit the street. So it's always difficult to compare in that context. But I think it possibly points to the points that Petra and Daniel were making around the temporal elements and that kind of, building of a civil society that might be happening. But yeah, very important point there. And I do think it leads on to some of the questions. There are a number of questions that ask about, and we think about actually the onus being on the majority population and around what can be done better to integrate. So what do you think can be done to support integration from a majority perspective? So there are a number of questions around tackling discrimination, promoting inclusion and understanding, reaching out to Roma families. What does the majority community need to do to support integration? Who wants to come? I also have a direct question for Daniel, and I know that I'm aware that Daniel needs to leave at 2:45, so I'll follow this one up with that one. But maybe going to Daniel, what do you think? You've spoken quite passionately about how good some of the interaction is with the community. So how do you feel? What could be done better to support integration?
Yeah, I think I'll give one example. I think we had in a particular area in Bradford, there was a British group, as mentioned, so the wider community that was terrorizing the area. They were racist against Roma people, and they were just terrorizing Roma people. We heard some very, very horrific stories of this group terrorizing the Roma people. We know that they once several times smashed one particular house, all of the windows, not just one, but every single window and door in the property. So we visited, we've spoken to several Roma families in the area who certainly felt like this was a racist attack. And so, they don't like us, they don't like that we're gypsies, that we're Slovak, and so on. Now, we gathered information, we gathered some details, and then we tried and locate this British gang and see if we can have a chat to them. So as I'm approaching, I can actually see the group a little bit in front. Straight away, I could see two Asian lads. There were two white lads. There were about 3 or 4 black lads. There was about 2 or 3 brown girls. There was different colors. There was different cultures and different ethnicities of this British group that I'm approaching that's supposed to be racist. And already in my head, I'm getting these confusing messages, thinking, wait a minute, I've just seen all Roma people that said this is a racist attack. Now, how do I approach this group and say, you guys are racist when there's different race within the group? So I had a chat with them, and then straight away, they were saying what they were saying. I've asked them, why these people are saying it, why they're actually doing it. And they said, because they're racist. So they called Roma people racist. And so it was very confusing, and it was a bit of a shock. But then when we thought about it, it was very clear. Both of the communities are very confused. The cultures, there's a lot of going on. There's a lot of cultures. I mean, they were calling them Czechos. And I think there was only one Czech family from like 20 Roma families that we spoke to. All of them were Slovakian. So they were already getting this wrong. So they didn't know, who these people are and so on. The fact that Roma people have felt, because this is a part of it's an element of the culture of not trusting the wider community and so on. Because of these behaviors, it's created tension. And now we have this, and of course the Roma are going through Brexit and going through many financial instabilities, such as the benefit system and so on, more open to them like to the wider community. So you have a lot of Roma people living in poverty, where again the wider community don't understand that it's going against them, or you're tipping, you're doing so on, you don't care, you don't have the up-to-date Nikes and all that kind of stuff. So I think, again, it's very much of confusion, and I think each city, each council, local authority needs to take responsibility and put in, again, the funding, the streams, the structure in place for organisations and local organisations to utilise. If you have the police that are visiting this area, this lady that had her windows, she had 23 police reports in her hand. I think that it got stopped.
Are we okay? We've got you back, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I've lost you there. Yeah.
No, you're back.
It's just unstable.
We can hear you, Daniel. Do you want to carry on?
Oh, yeah. I think what I was going to mention is this lady had 23 police reports, and the police actually haven't taken any action. We've met the group, we've spoken to the group that's actually done it. Everybody knew who was terrorizing this particular family. And she had 23 reports. We brought a policeman to that house. We had a conversation. We brought it to a constable and everything. And, you know, we could, again, clearly tell that that Roma family just didn't have enough information about the policing system, and didn't know that they actually have to have hard evidence to show that this is the person that smashed my window. You know, there's a camera footage, there's a picture, or there's witnesses and so on, to be able to put it through courts and actually get a persecution. So we found that we had to go back in the area with Alliance Hate Crime, with the police, spreading information about how to report crime and so on. And actually it's got better. And it's got to a fact where the Roma community are feeling like they want to set up a watchdog within the area, which we're really excited to help with, because we know there's the government's already got stuff in place, which we're hoping to use, and like set up where there's some of these important bodies in the community to kind of get like a watchdog together to make sure that these things don't happen.
Great, thank you. So you think there's an element clearly of the need for education across, you know, and also the building of trust into the main institutions?
Yes, and I think, you know, that they've closed a lot of these centres, these youth centres, and but there's still so much going on. We've got like boxing and martial arts and football, and you know, this still exists, and I think it just needs to be utilised. The pandemic certainly stopped us in our track, but we were certainly thinking of going back into the community and actually getting these groups into some sports activities to play together. So rather than the youth being divided and on the street and just terrorizing each other, is maybe you know, get them into some type of a football competition, maybe do some training around boxing, or again mixed martial arts and so on, and just kind of sharing each other and having these events. And like Bradford does summer festivals where, you know, the lots of the cultures show off their food and the dancing and the music, and there's urban and there's Indian and there's such a variety, but the Roma always kind of are at the bottom of the stage watching. So it'd be really good now for them to take part and you know, show off their culture and hopefully integrate in that way.
Great, thank you. Have the confidence, I guess, to feel like they can do that. Yeah, okay. Laura, Marius, in terms of kind of questions around what can the majority community do to support? Laura?
I think education is so important to break down and to challenge the stereotypes that people have. You know, I think in Britain, generally, it's accepted that we shouldn't be racist, but somehow still it's okay to say things about travellers and Roma that you wouldn't say about any other ethnic group. And I think more work needs to be done probably at schools, even in just civil society and conversations, through, whether that's through the media or in some mechanisms to communicate to people that it's also not okay, you know, to criminalize a whole group of people just because of the behavior of some. And I think that's it. But I think that's a really massive, I don't know how we entirely unpick this, because as Mario said at the beginning, we've been dealing with this othering of Roma and for 500, 600, 700 years, you know, it's not recent. But certainly I live in Kent now, and for a long time it was quite acceptable that the travellers would come in, they'd do the fruit picking, and they'd do their crafts or their trades that were still useful in the Victorian times, and now that's all gone and there's nothing left. You know, there's been some breaks in where travellers or Roma were once useful, and people don't recognise that now. So in, you know, as Daniel said, like even, you know, showing off the music and the culture would be great if there were ways to do that. I think the other problem we have at the moment currently just is the structure of local governments here, where they're so hugely underfunded. And it seems every year, every new policy is, oh, and the local authority can deliver that. And yes, we will also we will devolve that responsibility to the local level without ever providing the funding to make that actually meaningful and to work. And we're seeing it on the news at the moment that local authorities are going bankrupt. Those that are not bankrupt are, they're all on a knife edge with all the additional social care costs that they have. So, while I think it's really important for local authorities to lead on these kind of integration projects, I don't think they have the funding for that at the moment. There's a big gap between what would be great to see and what's actually possible. And council tax isn't going to fund it. So the government is going to have to rethink how they fund, I think, local councils and local authorities like that. So that's a big issue. Dana, on your question about social justice, I think there are things we could think that the states could do, but I just think sadly no state's interested in that. I think Roma and travellers across Europe have to make a much stronger effort to convince people that they are owed these reparations. And as I say, with the lack of knowledge and with the lack of understanding, it's just not happening. I mean, even the way that with the this case of Stanislav Tomasz, and where immediately the Prime Minister goes, oh, I believe the police. He's not even going to wait for an investigation. And the European Parliament didn't have a resolution as quickly as they did about Black Lives Matter. And yes, Martina, that is because perhaps we need volume. It hasn't happened enough, and it's all of these things take time, but we have had enough. I think there's many, the ERRC has a map of how many different cases there are of police brutality across Europe. There are more than enough. But yet, the European Union, the institutions, the state level, they're not interested. And until I think more people in the majority recognise that this is not fair and it's wrong, Roma are still such a small minority. It's going to be hard for them to make that case all on their own. They need, we all need to be involved in that. I think.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks for picking up on Dana's question as well. And yeah, there is clearly enough volume, but it is a question of when that then tips over to that point where it mobilizes, and that's a really interesting issue which we haven't quite pinned down yet. When does it, when injustice and discrimination and crime tip over into action? It's quite an interesting theme. Okay, so can I push that question around social justice, reparations, to Marius, and then you will have seen Daniel unfortunately had to leave us. We could possibly draw the discussion to a close after that, because we've been through a number of absolutely fascinating areas. So Marius, question around social justice.
Thank you very much indeed. A very important question, Dana, and I have to say that it has a lot of opposition in academia. A colleague of mine, Margareta Matake, in the US at Harvard University, inspired maybe or encouraged by her colleagues there, started to talk about the recognition and reparation of anti-racist policies, as it started the discussion back in South Africa with the reconciliation and recognition committees. But it seems that there is an interesting movement in Canada with the local people, Aboriginal population there. So it seems that on the other hand, there is a contra movement as well. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't say just social justice. I would say racial justice, because in the case of Roma, I think we have to say it correctly. And this is not just my saying, but it's also the fundamental rights agencies, which in her last reports included as a trigger and as an analytical concept the anti-gypsies and its impact on education policies, on employment, on housing, and employment. So it seems that the simple econometrics of or the social integration of Roma doesn't answer if we don't put a dimension that it's I would call it intersectional there in order to have an answer. Otherwise, we will have the evergreen answers, tautological in some points. Roma are poor, or Roma are discrimination because they are poor. And Roma are poor because they are poor. So the racial dimension should be kept. And I think that this it's an important element of your question to be added. Yeah, and there is a counter movement. So in US and even here, people in the academia, they are advocating, not to say doing activism, that critical race theory should be dragged out from the schools and universities. So every new idea like reparations and other policies that will bring equality, it's actually triggered out in a debate, conservatorists and people showing actually at the level of epistemology, but the same it's in political and policy work. So just going back to the UK it's free of racism report and the action, but it seems that yes, it appears on the debate, and there is a project, by the way, another important historian. It's Marius Turda, which is a professor of Oxford University. It's writing about the history of medicine and eugenics and the history of race as well. So it's interesting to read that. Yeah, there is a project where a group of people looking to define some of this and how they can come up with some theoretical but also some practical solution, but definitely would be a very difficult and long debate with the governments. So it's not yet, to conclude, it's not yet cemented at the level of the academia where the debate can flow up and down and you can really have an exchange on the idea. So even there, some people are rejecting, and there is quite a lot of contending activity, to say so. And the next level with the politics, I think it's would be another subject to be discussed and to follow up. But definitely, yes, the springs of the idea are there. And just to conclude, yeah, you put it there, the sterilization, the forced sterilization from Czechoslovakia. Yeah? It started during the Czechoslovakia time, but it was decided by the European Court of Human Rights a decade ago, and we have an infringement on that. The government is refusing to pay reparation to the Roma women from Czech Republic. But you have to know that eugenism and forced sterilization happened also in Sweden. It was even the so-called Swedish model of eugenism. The forced sterilization happened in Switzerland. Forced sterilization happened also in other parts of civilized Europe. So it wasn't just an ammunition of Central and Eastern European countries. And the Nazis' influence on what was the so-called eugenism and Holocaust, which ended up with the Holocaust policy. So What I tried to say at the beginning of our discussion and dialogue, that we have to have a historical analysis of Roma discrimination. I think also the geography, it's important because it's believed that some of the policies of exclusion are ammunition just to the former communist bloc or putting into some geography. But if we dig a little bit deeper, we'll see that Leo Lucassen, by the way, it shows that in a Germanic and Anglo-Saxon space, sterilization and some eugenic policies were implemented very successfully against Roma. So geography might matter also to understand that the oppression against Roma, it's not specific to a country, but sometimes it has a European dimension.
Thank you, Marius. Yes, quite a complex undertaking. But of course, there is some precedent now around reparations paid to colonies. Germany has just made reparations paid to former colonies. Again, stepping stones towards kind of really thinking through how you, and of course, you know, lots of criticisms of the amount of reparation paid in that context, but huge debate around what that means and how that will work. I think this has been an absolutely fascinating a couple of hours. We've been through a huge area of topics. Really grateful to our panel members. I'm afraid to say that two have left us already, but just to express again how grateful we are for your time and your expertise on these matters, and that we really hope to stay in touch, if that's okay, to make sure that we can move together and work on how to progress this really important topic, and find some solutions and put the voice out there, as Mario so rightly said, and Laura also has commented on. So can I thank you all? Can I thank the audience for the questions and everyone for their time, and Dana for her great work on putting all of this together, and Chloe, of course, for the technical support, as always, marvelous. And draw to a close here. Thank you all very much. It's been great seeing you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.